Arriving on a boat in London during the summer of 1821, a Scotsman called Gregor MacGregor ended his voyage by starting what could possibly be one of the most audacious confidence scams in history. Before he set sail to London, MacGregor had spent the previous 10 years fighting in the Venezuelan War of Independence. During the war, MacGregor had risen up the ranks until he was eventually given the rank of general. During his time in the Venezuelan War, MacGregor was given a large area of land in modern-day Honduras along the Black River. However, this area of land didn't provide much value as most of it was uninhabitable with the added inclusion of a malaria-ridden swamp. Regardless, MacGregor was keen to use his land to provide him with a small fortune, which started with the founding of Poyais, a non-existent country. The confidence trick begins. When MacGregor returned to Britain, he worked his way into the high society of London by asserting himself as the Prince of Poyais, a friendly, newly formed colony in Central America. To convince the British public, MacGregor executed an elaborate PR campaign, which included the publication of a 355-page booklet containing highly detailed and totally fabricated descriptions of Poyais. The booklet contained information about the tricameral parliamentary system, commercial and banking systems, uniform designs for its military regiments, the honours system, the Poyais coat of arms and national flag, its climate and agriculture, details of its dazzling city. The guidebook, primarily aimed at prospective settlers, also described how the rivers of Poyais contained globules of pure gold. As part of his plan to sell the idea, MacGregor went on to establish Poyais government offices across Britain, printed Poyaisian currency, created government documents and even produced songs about Poyais to have them sung in Britain's cities. By 1823, MacGregor had raised £200,000 from the sale of Poyaisian government bonds, all of which were underwritten by the City of London Bank, Sir John Perring, Shaw, Barber and Company. This was in addition to the wealth MacGregor had generated from the sale of paper currency and Poyaisian land certificates. The trick concludes. Out of the 270 hopeful colonists who had set sail for Poyais, only 50 surviving Poyais settlers had made it back to London by October 1823 with the news that it was all a lie. Unfortunately, as news and outrage swept across the British press, MacGregor had already fled to Paris, just days before the now outraged settlers arrived back in Britain. Why was this allowed to happen? The answer is surprisingly simple, but first, we need to look at how such a scam can be funded and is best described in the Austrian business cycle theory of Ludwig von Mises. The theory regards economic business cycles as an excessive growth in credit, believing that a prolonged period of artificially low interest rates and credit creation leads to a volatile and unstable imbalance between savings and investments. Up until 1822, the British banking and monetary system appeared to be decentralized, with around 800 banks throughout the country having the right to issue their own banknotes which were redeemable in gold. However, in an effort to reverse the monetary and price deflation which had been going on since 1819, the Bank of England, in coordination with the British government, initiated an extensive policy of credit expansion in 1822. Still Britain's central bank today, the Bank of England not only had a monopoly on banknote issuance in the London area, but were legally entitled to allow the private banks across Britain to use their notes as reserves as if they were gold. As private banks were allowed to issue their own banknotes, they used the Bank of England notes as reserves to back their own private notes. When issuing their own notes, the private banks of the time could pyramid their own credit expansion and note issues on top of their fractional Bank of England note reserves, which were themselves a pyramid on top of an even more fractional reserve of gold. This system gave the Bank of England enormous control over credit expansion within the British banking system, by simply altering the volume of its own note issues. Just as Mises' Austrian business cycle theory would predict, the credit expansion which started in 1822 caused a boom in the investment of high-risk, potentially highly rewarding ventures. British investors jumped at the chance to invest extensively in the newly independent states of Latin America, after the wars of independence in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, not because of saved capital, but because of the declining lending standards and borrowing costs which accompany any period of credit expansion. This led to the creation of a speculative mania and period of malinvestment, playing perfectly into MacGregor's plan to deceive speculative investors and raise money for his non-existent paradise. The credit expansion, which occurred from 1822 to 1825, not only gave life to the most daring fraud in history, which affected a small group of prospectors. A wider bubble was also inflated, which finally burst during the financial panic of 1825. In recent years, central bank credit expansion has continued to repeat the same trick, causing bubbles in absurd and risky investments which have resulted in the financial crisis or credit crunch of 2008-9 and the dot-com bubble, which peaked in value on March 10, 2000. However, there is perhaps no lesson from history, which more vividly illustrates the dangers of credit expansion-fueled business cycles than the story of Gregor MacGregor and his imaginary country of voyage. MacGregor was never convicted of any crime for his involvement of the voyage scheme, but in 1826, did attempt to repeat the exact same scheme in France.